Hello and welcome back to A History of Saps, Blackjacks, and Slungshots. So, this here is the first modern item we're going to look at because it is impossible to find a vintage rope slungshot, pretty much. The colonial model I've shown before, it's about as close as I'm going to get to that era and, possibly being seafaring, or at least really connected to it. So, now that I've got a rope model here to show, we're going to talk about the original slungshot, hence the title of the video. So, the first slung shots were heaving knots used by sailors. So they were a tool, as I mentioned, and a tool turned weapon. What is a heaving knot? Quick note before I get into that, there's going to be some duplicative information between this video and the leather slungshot, but that's the order that I got the weapons in and did the videos, so, just in case somebody's watching this one and they haven't watched the previous one. So, back to the heaving knot. You're a sailor, you want to send a rope across open water, it's difficult to throw, you tie a knot like this around a round object that's got some weight to it, and now you're in business. You get this spinning, it's like a bola, like a South American bola, you get this spinning, and send it flying, and it's going to do the job. Once it lands on the other side, on the deck of a ship, or, on the pier, whatever, your mate, the corresponding sailor can grab it, and tie the line. And it's actually pretty complex, like this is the one, they would use this to attach it to another line, and it was really to get that other line across the open water. Doesn't matter. Just think of it as, being cast across that open space, and that's how they came up with this. So, generally this knot here is called a monkey's fist. You'll see that all over online, right? There's all kinds of keychains being made around this design right here, this kind of 17 and 1800s type design, and just picture that length of rope going a long, long ways. But when you turn it into a personal self-defense item, doesn't need to go quite so long. This one's about 2 feet long, and then of course you have a lanyard at the end, right? Run your hand through, grab on, and here you go. Here's a good view of the total weapon. Going back to length for a second, I mentioned this is about 2 feet in length, and interestingly, I found an old book called the Ashley Book of Knots. So it's like this knot Bible, and it has just one page with like 7 variations of kind of sailor rope-based sap weapons. This is really interesting. And this kind of conventional slungshot design was just about 2 feet in length. So this gives you a tremendous reach advantage over the other weapons in our family, by the way. But again, there's a great view. You can see both ends of it. You can see, how it's going to generate momentum, right? All the weight is on one end. It's not a well-balanced weapon at all. It's all about generating maximum impact through the swinging motion. There's no doubt about that. And funny enough, by accident, this has the same, or similar at least, physical properties to most of our other weapons, because there's a dense, heavy load, which is kind of like the real, weapon or the real impact provider, that's surrounded by a softer kind of cushioning agent, which in this case is rope. Concentrating on the weapons use, what you've got here is obviously a fully flexible weapon. Most of our weapons are kind of like semi-flexible, well, this one's completely, and you would, in order to use that, run your hand through here, and this other knot here actually makes a really great handle. Some experimentation my 5-year-old son helped me with definitely proves that, so it works really well, and here you go, right? Free swinging weapon. You do not want to get hit with the, eventually lead ball or whatever it is, metal ball that was in there. There's a little swing for you. I know you couldn't hear it. And that's what kind of separates, and there's several things that separate this from most of the weapons in our family, but one, the length, 2, fully free swinging, right? So once you hit, you've got to reinitiate momentum all over again if you're going to strike home. With a springy weapon, you can smack somebody, reach back, retract, and smack back again. So the kind that actually have coil springs, for instance, or flat spring steel in the shaft. Very different behavior from this one. You're going to get maximum output with this, but it is not going to be easy to reinitiate, so a little bit of a higher level of difficulty. So this one's big, as I mentioned, and it still pretty much fits in my fist. So you can imagine the smaller, pocket versions that grew out of this, how easily they could hide in a hand. If this is really this one really is quite large. So you could imagine if I wanted to wrap that up, it could sit in a pocket, even this one, but a smaller version. And absolutely. Just imagine the ball being small enough like this. Here's the whole thing, and imagine the ball being much smaller than this one. This one's like the size of my fist. If it was significantly smaller than that, I could wrap this whole thing up like that, keep it pulled up in a pocket. Very easy to carry, very easy to hide. Speaking of the slungshot sucker punch, I think I mentioned this last time with the leather version, but it was very effective. There's no doubt about it. That wide arc, the much wider arc that it generates than the typical sap, equals a devastating shot. And somebody who was sucker punched by this, you saw this in incident after incident in the 19th century, was done. If they weren't knocked out cold, they were certainly unable to continue. You can see that over and over again. So there's no doubting the effectiveness of this weapon. And speaking of its, weapon effectiveness, let's go back to the original versions that the sailors used. They would have been larger than the pocket-sized ones I was just talking about, maybe about the same length, but bigger and heftier. And there are descriptions of, small cannonballs being used, being wrapped up in these things, and you could only imagine how devastating. That's obviously lethal with one shot if you hit to the head with it. And as such, it'd be a boarding weapon that would stand toe-to-toe with any of the others. The pike, flails. Actually, it's kind of a strange thing, but flails were popular with sailors. I don't understand flexible weapons like this one here, or flails, big versions, being that useful in ship-bound combat. I would think there's just limited space, and you could get it caught in the rigging and all kinds of stuff, but they made it work, so I guess I had enough room to operate. And the real large, devastating versions of this here, those I would say most certainly were the originals, and then just kind of downscaled and just kept going down until you ended up where it's funny. That trend continued for centuries, because it really continued to today, where you have those tiny little monkey fist keychains. And those are almost a different weapon entirely. And if you watch people experiment on YouTube, they will note that it has a tendency to bounce back and smack you in the hand or the wrist. And that's not a good thing. Well, these old ones, that wouldn't have been a problem. Whether they're a large version or, a 1 to 2 foot one, there's enough length there where that wasn't going to happen. In terms of technique, there's one other I'd like to point out. We've been talking and imagining this obviously circular motion where you bring it down onto your subject's head. It could be, a horizontal circle and it comes upside their head. But there was one other, which is basically the slungshot version of a jab. You can get this spinning and just send it out flying, perpendicular from your body, basically. So it's coming straight out. Now, the little tiny versions, it's kind of like throwing a straight punch at somebody and then just opening up your hand. So obviously, inertia being what it is, the load continues traveling forward, and you get a straight shot to their face, and you could do the same thing with a larger version here, but that they would definitely see coming. So there is that angle of attack, which with some of our saps, like the flat sap and others, you just don't have that option at all. If you ever look up a martial artist, like a wushu martial artist messing around with a meteor ball, Chinese weapon, it's basically kind of like a monkey's fist, forget the knot. It's kind of like a slungshot, a tiny one with a super long rope, which is interesting, and you'll see them do that a lot in their forms. They'll send it flying straight out. Lastly, I'd point out that it's ironic, the slungshot fell out of favor long before saps and blackjacks. They kind of took over for it. But today, that was around, let's say, the turn of the 20th century. And then they really disappeared a little while after that. But then today, they're still around and experiencing a resurgence because of those little keychains. So they are back. And now when you see one, you will know what it is. Thanks.